We've got two of the main architects of the budget, Mr. Rajiv Mehrishi, Finance Secretary, and Mr. Arvind Subramanian, Chief Economic Advisor. Thank you so much for speaking with us here at ET. Now, I have to admit that the consensus view of all corporates and market participants that we've spoken to so far is very favorable. They believe this is a pro-growth budget. Mythili, consulting it, has a slightly different view. We're going to get down to the numbers. But first, Mr. Mehrishi, help us understand, as you got down to the budget-making exercise, what was your broad, what was your broad priority? Was the overwhelming priority to revive growth? Is that what you put above everything else? Was it compelling for you to come up with a pro-growth budget, so to say?
Well, growth is was the main factor, because I think this government has a mandate for both change and growth, but it had to be balanced with the urgent and immediate needs of the weaker sections, etc., to which obviously this government also seems to be very committed. So basically, it is a balancing act between growth and the social security that the less advantage in the country need.
Dr. Subramanian, your economic survey probably hinted at it when you said that 3%, we need to look at it from a medium-term point of view as far as the fiscal deficit is concerned. Do you believe that credit rating agencies will be okay with the fact that we've not erred on the side of caution as far as fiscal deficit is concerned?
See, remember, what we said in the economic survey is that we need to move to the medium-term target of 3%, right? But remember, in the short run, there were at least 3 factors that I think lessen the need for accelerated fiscal consolidation. I use the word accelerated deliberately because, we've consolidated. 4.1 to 3.9 is consolidation. We've not done 4.1 to 3.6 accelerated. So that terminology should be clear, first of all. Second, and the reason why one has to relook that is, one, the macroeconomic situation is much better. So why consolidate if there's no real pressure? That's one. Second, also, as FS, the Finance Secretary said, there were other competing things, which is growth, which meant that we needed more space for public investment. And third, also, the fact that there were this whole 14 Finance Commission recommendations, it shrank the envelope. So both in terms of the desirability of accelerated fiscal consolidation, and add in the fact that, remember, if India is, as I think and we think, still a recovering economy, you don't want to follow pro-cyclical fiscal policy. So pro-cyclical fiscal policy, lower pressures, a reduced envelope meant that, it was absolutely legitimate to reevaluate the 3.6 target.
But Mythili?
If you said you don't want to follow a pro-cyclical policy, fiscal policy, I entirely buy that. In that case, your fiscal deficit should have come down, because if the economy is recovering, a 4.1 to 3.9, is that good enough? Particularly when the quality of the fiscal deficit is not really improved. If you look at the revenue deficit as a ratio of the fiscal deficit, it's gone up from 70 to 71, 2% closely, and the effective revenue deficit, which the Finance Commission came down so strongly on, saying it's a very artificial construct. In fact, that has gone up quite sharply from 43% to 51%, the effective revenue deficit.
Go ahead.
See, I'll answer that actually. If you look at the overall fiscal transfers to the states, they also count as a revenue expenditure for us on the revenue side. So I think you have to be careful about this budget because of the extraordinary change that the Finance Commission has brought about. The 42% devolution has been brought about. So if you're talking about pro-cyclical change, then really speaking, you have to take into account the fact that we have a much shrunk fiscal space to play around with. So that is the basic thing. So, and with the need to continue some of the anti-poverty schemes, there was pressure. I agree, there was a pressure for keeping revenue expenditure high, and which is why, if you see the entire effort is, if you look at the infrastructure effort of this budget, it actually runs across the budget. So whether it's a tax exemption limit for under only instead of being under ATC, ATCCD, whether it's the laws that for bankruptcy, whether it's the law for solving the disputes, the entire theme of whether it's bond market reform,
No, clearly, the budget is clearly, as far as the middle and upper middle class and the corporate sector is concerned, international investors are concerned, it's clearly a very good budget for them. My unhappiness with the budget was really that I felt that the poorer sections of the society have been left out, because even though there has been an increase in public investment in infrastructure, if you look at plan expenditure, it has come down dramatically. It is just, it is less than what it was as per the revised estimates. And ultimately, it has to come out, the poorer sections has to benefit from plan expenditure.
That's wrong. Yeah, absolutely wrong. I tell you, factually wrong. You see, what's happened is, what the Finance Commission has done is changed in the composition of expenditure. So this this extra 1,70,80,000 crore rupees that is being transferred to the states would have been the plan expenditure that we would have incurred. So then our plan expenditure would have looked like more like 6 point something. So what we have done is that actually, if you look at the entire envelope, is this 4.65 plan expenditure we are showing on the central budget, plus the 1.8 that we have passed on, has been passed on as actually in lieu of, because the Finance Commission counted it as the plan expenditure of the states. So if you refer to para 7.43 of the Finance Commission, so this is actually, the plan size is much bigger. It should have shrunk more really, if you ask me. But it's because of this, anti-poverty schemes which are so necessary that, actually, if you allow me a moment, the Finance Commission in para 7.43 says that it reckoned the plan expenditure of the states while calculating their expenditure, because they refused to differentiate between plan and non-plan.
Yeah. But you have continued with that
Yeah, we have. So then what happened, for the same reason that, there had to be, schemes that were pro-poor. Now what happened was that they went on to say, therefore, the implication of that paragraph is that the schemes that were being run as central assistance to state plans should actually have gone to the states. But that hasn't happened.
Okay.
31 schemes would have gone to them, only 8 are going to them.
Okay.
We are continuing to support the remaining.
Okay.
So therefore, if you look at the plan size, actually it's gone up from 4.65 to 4.65 plus 1.8.
Okay.
And that's why the Prime Minister's appeal to the Chief Minister in his letter the same day as the Finance Commission report was decided upon, that he would urge the Chief Ministers to participate in these schemes, because we are continuing to support them.
Okay.
Right.
So that's the real fiscal pressure here, that you see, even the schemes that are supposed to be transferred were not transferred. So that had to be accounted for, and yet growth and change had to be accounted for.
Right. Do you want to comment on that, Dr. Subramanian?
No, so I want to make 3 points. One, Mythili, this is just a, I think, terminological thing.
Okay.
When I say we're recovering, that means we're still below potential.
Okay.
So that's why it's pro-cyclical.
So what is our potential rate of growth? Where would you peg it at?
Remember that if you've upgraded actual GDP, you've got to upgrade potential GDP growth as well.
So where would you put it?
No, so I think now, earlier I would say on the old estimate, based on the old estimate, which was about 8.5.
Okay.
Now, given that that's been notched up 2 percentage points, potential has also gone up by about 2 percentage points, I would say. Okay. So we are still below potential, and therefore pro-cyclical fiscal policy. Okay. That's a terminology thing. The second, on the quality of expenditure, I would submit that if you look at the center, right, there's been a big cut in revenue expenditure, and capital expenditure is going up by 0.3% of GDP. So the quality of expenditure has changed dramatically in this budget. The last point, which actually just to substantiate what Rajiv was saying, that when you talk about, you've cut for the poor, look at it from point of view of the country as a whole. From the country as a whole, gross tax revenue has gone up by about 0.3% of GDP. It's just that where it's being spent, that's all that's changed. If more is going to the states, they're going to be then doing the spending instead of the center. So as Rajiv said, the aggregate envelope for social spending has not declined.
Right. Dr. Subramanian, the other key factor is, how does the central bank move? Because the governor has made it very clear that it's, the call to move on rates will be dependent on the quality of fiscal consolidation. Mythili raised a valid point, but do you think there's, the RBI will be convinced with the quality of fiscal consolidation for it to move aggressively on bringing down rates?
I think, whether they'll be convinced, you've got to ask the RBI, But let me just say 2 things. One is, underlying inflationary pressures are on their way down. There's a structural shift. So even on the basis of what's happening on inflation alone, as we say, there's a scope for monetary easing. And then the second point is that if you take a view of the budget, which certainly I do, that There's been expenditure compression. We've had to balance competing objectives, as Rajiv said, and we've delivered some fiscal consolidation, and public expenditure has gone up. I think it's been a good balancing job, while without deviating from our medium-term target. I think it's on balance a good budget that sense, and I would try and persuade the RBI to look at it that way.
Mr. Mehrishi, I entirely buy your point that maybe as far as planned expenditure is concerned, it's because of the Finance Commission, the fallout of that. But if you look at the gross tax revenue, I'm talking about gross tax revenue, there's a shortfall this year of over 1 lakh crores. But next year you expected an increase in tax revenue of close to 2 lakh crores. So that huge buoyancy, is that really justified by what we've seen?
See, I'll tell you that there is another change here which you might have noticed, that as the oil prices came down, part of the benefit was passed on to the consumer, but part of it was absorbed as excise. There's also an increase in service tax.
Sure.
So there is ARM measure involved in this. So like-to-like comparison is not really correct, because it's not just a incremental increase over last time, but there's some ARM measure. But the increase overall,
a huge amount, 1,98,000
yeah, about
crores.
15%.
Yes.
So actually, I personally feel that this target is very, very doable, in my opinion. Actually, in my opinion,
you were not able to achieve it, and you fell grossly short last year.
The point is, last 3 years, the target has been short by 1 lakh of crores, all right? But then they were also assuming growth rates of 28% on service tax, etc., which are unrealistic. So I think this is not, if you look at the details of these figures, these seem to be very realistic figures to me. And I would say that this is, I for one would say, though the person who's best placed to answer this question is the Revenue Secretary.
No.
But I would say that this is, yeah, I know you can also talk in terms of GDP tax.
I want to support what Rajiv said about how, see, the difference between last year and this year is that this year you're going to have 3 huge additional revenue measures. One is the diesel, the excise on diesel, which on an annual basis, last year you got about 20,000, this year you're going to get about 52,000. 2, you're going to get the coal cess, which is going to be another 6,500 crores. And third, as Rajiv said, you're going to get the excise tax increase. So if you strip this out, the underlying buoyancy is not that different from last year. So it is not exaggerated buoyancy at all. It's pretty much what we got buoyancy last year, plus the new measures, and that's what gives you this big increase.
Right. Tax to GDP ratio current year is 10.
Yeah,
it's rising
10.3.
Yeah, it's rising to 10.3.
Right. The other point that's probably not been touched upon, and many believe, and the one feedback that we got from CEOs is that Make in India, it's supposed to be a pet theme of this government. The Prime Minister has spoken a lot about it. There's very little in terms of an enabling environment for manufacturing, whether it's fiscal incentives or obviously you can't address issues on land and labor in the budget. But the consensus view is that enough has not been done to create a manufacturing revival. Would you agree with that? And why so?
You see, again, everything is not in the budget. I think what the government has been doing over the last couple of months is they're moving enough on Make in India. But there are elements in this also. Again, if you look at the announcement regarding the bond market, if you look at the announcement regarding the the decision to have composite caps, or if you have a decision to, allow foreign investment in alternative investment funds, sure. The tax rebate for the tax pass-through for the alternative investment funds. So it's not bankruptcy law again, as I said, transparency. I think one of the biggest things that most people are missing out is the intent announced to have uniform regulations across the infrastructure sector. So I think there's a lot of Make in India in this budget. It's just not grouped under perhaps a Make in India sub-heading, but it's in different parts.
But I just want to add to that. One, the best thing that you can do for Make in India, apart from all the things that Rajiv said, is to create your infrastructure. Infrastructure, any generalized ease of doing business, building infrastructure, labor law, land law is good for Make in India. And that, as Rajiv said, some is in the budget, some is not. But I would also dispute the view that, businessmen advocate that, Make in India can be achieved through incentives. I mean, they have an incentive to say it will be achieved through incentives. I think we as broader policymakers should say that you do it by improving the general policy environment and not by tweaking an exemption here and an incentive here, because we've been down that route before. and we know what the consequences are.
So you don't think that's going, so you're saying that's not going to happen even outside of the budget?
No, there is some, in terms of, this, the tariff inversion, for example, I think that's legitimate, that's being done. But, to announce a whole bunch of freebies, sector-specific, company-specific, situation-specific, I don't think the way forward to achieve Make in India.
Mr. Mehrishi, it's a good idea to have a broad roadmap for corporate tax reduction. But I haven't seen the fine print of the budget. Has the government spelled out exactly how much the corporate tax rate is going to be this year and which are the exemptions it's going to withdraw?
No, actually in the year 15-16, neither a reduction nor a withdrawal is planned.
Okay.
So the action, whatever action is, will begin in 16-17.
Okay.
And as the FM pointed out, that he would like to do it over the next 5 years. So that leaves him, first year gone, so leaves him 4 years. And then he also said that he doesn't want to take industry by surprise. So I think they'll work through the tax department, will work through the system and see what can be withdrawn at what time.
So at the moment,
so it's more of a feel-good announcement.
At the moment, there's no roadmap.
No, basically, it's an announcement which puts people on alert, and they can then know what to do and where we are going. So you're not taking a sudden turn without warning.
Yeah, but you're not saying whether it will come down from 30 to 25 to 20. I mean, there's no
30 to 25.
25, sorry, I'm saying percentage. I'm talking percentage terms.
No, that is not been announced.
Okay. And as far as making a composite cap for FDI and FII, the general understanding amongst economists at least is that FDI is far superior. So you need to have preferential treatment for FDI rather than FII. So is this move slightly retrograde? Are we encouraging hot money?
Actually, it's impossible to differentiate. And there are hundreds of situations where, you will not find it possible to say what is FDI and what is FII. So that is the reason why we are giving up this attempt. So FII invested in equity, is it FDI or not? We don't know. So we had a Myram committee which gave a recommendation and then we worked on that, but actually that's an impossible distinction to make. The line is so thin.
As far as the amendment to the FEMA, Section 6 is concerned, if control over equity flows goes to the government, that doesn't handicap the RBI when it comes to exchange rate management, because that is the role of the central bank. We've seen central banks all over the world, even the Swiss central bank intervening. So does this not handicap, because the RBI was very much against it when the FSLRC had recommended this. In fact, they fought tooth and nail against it.
He's the expert on this.
I tell you that.
But I will say something.
First of all, it's a de facto position, which is being converted into a de jure position. Because even today, most equity-related decisions on foreign inflows are taken in government.
In terms of caps?
Yeah, yes. FDI, for example. So it's a recognition of the fact that this is being done, that it's already being done, it's already in effect. Secondly, the interventions to be made by RBI are of different nature altogether. They still have monetary policy to play with, they still have the reserves to play with. So intervention need not always be in terms of sort of in stopping or enlarging equity flows. In any case, if there is a situation or a challenge, then what makes you feel that government would not be keen to meet it equally well or equally on front foot? Surely government would also react. So it's in a situation where you have to intervene, and if you have to and if you can effectively, which is of course a different debate altogether. But if you can, then of course, obviously whatever steps that the government needs to take would be taken, I guess. So
and also the provision says in consultation with the RBI, so it's going to be so it's going to be done.
Dr. Subramanian, the other issue is a divestment target that's been set in the budget. Many believe it's very ambitious given the track record of the government. I know you're looking at Suti's sale as well, and there are other specifics that you're looking at. But are you hopeful that you'll get that target this year?
It's ambitious by past track record of past couple of years. But I think again, in my assessment is doable, especially because, what FM announced in the budget speech. FM said that he would also look at strategic disinvestment and disinvestment in loss-making PSUs. So if that were to happen, then you can talk of, larger investments, so disinvestments. So I think it's not an impossible target. I think it's a target well within reach. Of course, I think Secretary disinvestment will have to work very hard. She has a job on her hands.
He has to work very hard this year also. But that's what I wanted to ask you. How is the government so confident of achieving 4.1? Because by December we'd already crossed your total fiscal deficit amount, absolute amounts. We'd already crossed it by over 12,000 crores.
No, you see,
so we have hardly 6 weeks left. Where will we get that money from?
No, obviously all your major inflows of revenues also come in March, and expenditure tends to decline. So I think you will easily meet that.
Of 4.1?
Yeah, but I am extremely confident it won't be 4.2, you know, and whether it will be 4.09 or 4.11, I don't know.
That's okay, that's a small.
Right.
That's a margin of where I'm sure the market will agree.
I think, you know, because remember, I think broadly what's going to happen is that the diesel cesses will get you another 20,000 crores, and there's going to be, there has been pretty big expenditure compression, like happens every year. So between the two, I think it should be, I mean, not just should be achieved, we're very close to knowing that it's going to be achieved.
Arvind, in fact, talking about your economic survey, you know, I was looking through it very carefully, and you argued very forcefully against subsidies, and you also pointed to rail, where there's a huge cross-subsidization to passenger fare, and you said freight rates should not be increased, but the railway minister did exactly the opposite. So, did you feel very disappointed that the rail minister didn't listen to your advice?
Yeah, I think that, you know, I've been in close contact with him. See, I think that here, I think it's a matter of sequencing. I think, you know, you could argue that, you know, should reform come first or investment come first, or should it be the other way around? And that's, I think, a political call. I think, you know, because I know, and even in terms of a speech, I mean, there has to be some change in terms of organization, rates at some point, and so on. So I think it's a sequencing question, and where we agree completely on is one, that there's massive underinvestment and we need to change that. And second, you know, all these things will have to be rationalized at some point. So the question is when it's going to be done. But it is true that what really struck me about it were two things. The work that we did. One was the cross-subsidization, which everyone knows. It just seems very high compared to China, for example. Yeah, and of course that makes our manufacturing less competitive, because you know, manufacturing is logistics intensive. But the other thing which surprised me really was how much, or rather how few of the low-income passengers actually benefit from even the lower consumer rate. Because, you know, I think it's some really astounding number that you put in terms of how many actually benefit from, in terms of actual usage, from the subsidy for passenger traffic. It's quite striking.
Right.
Mr. Mehrishi, why is the food subsidy bill so high? I thought the government is going to follow the Shanta Kumar committee's recommendations and drastically bring down, you know, the coverage of the population and also ensure that there are no leakages. But I find the food subsidy bill is still very high, well over 100,000 crores.
Obviously, our understanding of the Shanta Kumar committee report, yours and mine, is different, because Shanta Kumar committee report, I think, is basically for reforming FCI.
But they did talk also about the coverage.
So that's the other. You know, I don't think there's any thinking in the government at this stage to reduce or backtrack on the food security this item. So I don't think there is any such thing. What this FMS said repeatedly in the speech today, I think he said it 3-4 times, is that what they would like is to prevent leakage. And that is as a matter of fact, he said it in as many words, that we need to reduce subsidy leakages, not subsidies. So I think that's where you are. So that is the stated government policy.
Right. I think we should get closing comments from both the budget architects, so to say. Dr. Subramanian, you know, in your economic survey, you did say that one shouldn't look for the big bang, and you know, one should look for creative incremental steps. So how do you think this budget lacks the big bang and it has a lot of these creative incremental steps? Is that a fair way of assessing this budget?
I think the way I would put it is, you know, all of you can debate whether it's big bang or incrementalism, but I think it maintains the momentum of whatever's been happening over the last few months. I mean, since the government took office. So the momentum is all in the right direction.
Before Sandeep asks you for a last word, I just wanted to ask you one more question on making EPF voluntary. Now, it is a fact that at the low
of whatever's been,
you know, unless you have some compulsory deduction for Provident Fund, it is the families who really suffer. So should this kind of option have been given? Because we're not talking about people like you and I, you know, but we're talking about people for whom that compulsory contribution is family security.
See, I want to clarify one thing, that again the FM speech says that this will require stakeholder consultation. But having said that, I would like to also point out to you that if you look at the deductions, you'll be surprised to know that, maybe you know it, that if an employee is getting 5,000 rupees a month, he suffers deductions of 2,000 rupees. That's 40% of his salary. But if an employee is getting 55,000 rupees, he suffers cuts only of 5,000 rupees.
Right.
So actually the poor man, you are making poorer. Now what it means actually is that you are pushing him into informal sectors because he needs the 5,000 rupees to stay alive, 6,000 rupees to stay alive, to keep his family alive. So you are actually, are you doing him a favor? Are you, it's like the labor laws, you know. It's like saying that I'll do all these labor laws for the welfare of the labor. What you did was you reduced the labor force and the growth, the possible growth in labor force.
For that you need to amend the labor law rather than the
No,
Act.
it's the same, it's part of the same thing. So labor law reforms were needed and Rajasthan carried them out. And I think some reform in EPF law is required because really speaking, and again the employer's contribution is not being touched. So what you are doing is that you are giving actually, for a 5,000 rupee employee, you are actually giving him a 1,200 rupee living expense. So there is no point telling him that I'm saving, I'll make you save for tomorrow if he finds it difficult to, you know, scrape a living together today. So I think it's a reform that's really called for because current law militates against the low-paid worker, and that I think is incorrect.
Right. Fair enough, Mr. Mehrishi. Let you have the last word. Then, you know, the finance minister keeps saying that one shouldn't look at budget as a one-day event. You know, reforms are an ongoing activity. There are 364 days to take more steps. Help us understand what are the areas, broad areas in which the government is going to be focusing on over the next few weeks now that the budget is out of the way.
No, our immediate task, less Mythili sort of upbraid me, is to make sure that 4.1%
is met.
But I think the more, on a serious note, I think the more important part is that basically we need to start working on the announcements because a lot of these announcements create a lot of work. You know, there are announcements which will say that we'll bring out orders, schemes, regulations. So we need to start work on them. So other than closing the year, which has also some, you know, involves some work, we also need to start beginning work on what we need to do next year.
On that note, Mr. Mehrishi, Dr. Subramanian, thank you so much for joining us and explaining the real numbers behind the budget. Mythili, thanks for standing by with that chat. Thank you so much.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.